Question number 4, potassium hydroxide. We've got a nice little diagram here first of all. It looks like a bit of a circuit, a battery happening here. Potassium hydroxide is an ionic compound that used as an electrolyte in many household alkaline batteries. An electrolyte connects two parts of the batteries, the internal circuit, and allows electricity to flow. Pure potassium hydroxide cannot be used in these batteries. It either must be molten or dissolved in a gel-like substance. What is the formula for potassium hydroxide? First of all, we want a formula, so it means potassium positive and hydroxide negative, which means KOH, because we have a positive and a negative, which means we need one of each ion, leaving us with KOH there. Explain why pure, solid potassium hydroxide cannot be used in electrolyte. All right, what does electrolyte need to do? It needs to allow electricity to flow. What is solid potassium hydroxide? That's an ionic compound. So therefore, we need to go with why would a solid ionic compound not be able to be used? Because it can't conduct electricity. And you would say solid ionic compounds cannot conduct electricity. Then I'll ask myself, why can't they conduct electricity? Can I explain that? And I can. It's because the cations and anions are locked in place and cannot move. And you can see here, through answering this question, I first of all had to decipher what type of material is potassium hydroxide and what property does it need to be an electrolyte. It's an ionic compound and it needs to conduct electricity. If it can't do that, we need to explain why. And this here is your go-to responses for the fact that ionic compounds as a solid cannot conduct electricity. Would you expect molten or dissolved potassium hydroxide to be used? Explain your answer. Okay, it's going to be dissolved. Now, why is it going to be dissolved? Well, the other option is molten, which means it needs to be melted. And ionic compounds have a very high melting point, so therefore you wouldn't necessarily want your battery to get extremely hot. So you say dissolved because molten ionic compounds would require very high temperatures as they have very high melting points. All right, and I'm shorthanding this. I'm going to write MP for melting points. All right, V high for very high, and so on and so forth. But the logic is there that your potassium hydroxide, you can't have it as molten because otherwise you would have an extremely high temperature, like upwards of like 1,000 degrees to melt an ionic compound. You can't do that in a household appliance. Lastly, part D, use a labeled diagram and a sentence to explain why copper is used to create the external circuit connecting the battery to the bulb. All right, so again, a labeled diagram of copper. What is copper? It's a metal, so therefore I'm going to draw a labeled diagram of a metal. Here it is, positive, 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 and random electrons sitting around. Again, highlighting the fact that that's a cation, that's a delocalized electron. Now, why can they be a circuit? Well, there's two reasons. I'm going to choose one of them and then I'll explain that, and then I'll talk about the other one. Firstly, this needs to conduct electricity. So why can these conduct electricity? The copper has delocalized electrons which are free to move and conduct electricity. Your other thing that you could talk about is the fact that metals are ductile and can be used to make wires. And you could say the fact that in copper, the cations can move and still be held by delocalized electrons, making them ductile. Again, looking at what is the property we're talking about, what is the material we're talking about, and what is my go-to sentence in explaining that property using the model for our material. And that's our last question on that test. It's all about reading and then applying your knowledge to that scenario. Identify what the material is, draw the diagram, identify what the property is, write the sentence that you've learnt off by heart. And that's it.